Well, welcome everyone to this session of the Ex-Religious Support Network. My name is Les Allen. I'm the facilitator of the group. This group started in 2018, September 2018, as a self-support group for people who are leaving their religion or who have left their religion. So about tonight, the title is Religious Trauma, Identity and Relationships. So this is the third session in a series of sessions on religious trauma. The first session, delivered by Caroline Winzenried, was a general introduction to religious trauma. It was called The Hidden Toll of Religious Trauma. And then I think it was 6 weeks ago, she ran the second session, which was Religious Trauma, The Persistence of Purity Culture. So in this session, Caroline Winzenried, Caroline's a professional counsellor, and in this session, she will delve deeper into another aspect of religious trauma. So in this session, she discusses how religious disillusionment can often introduce tension into relationships with friends and family who are still religious. Many people experience a profound loss when they leave a religion from the severed or strained ties with loved ones and communities. For some people, the risk of rejection is so strong that they feel they need to, quote, stay in the closet. Caroline will explore the impact of religious trauma on identity and the ability to create and foster meaningful relationships. So a little about Caroline. Caroline Winzenried is a counsellor operating here in Boronia, Victoria, in Australia. She works from an existential-humanistic lens with individuals across the lifespan, from adolescent to older adults, on issues including anxiety, depression, and interpersonal relationships. Her areas of special interest include working with religious trauma and grief and loss. So I'd like to hand over to our special guest tonight, Caroline Winzenried. Thank you, Caroline.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Les, for that introduction. It's really great to be here again tonight, and it's great to see some familiar faces here. This is an issue that's really important to me. This is one of the things that I most enjoy working with as a counselor, is people who have left religion and who are kind of navigating where to go from there. And tonight, as Les said, I'd like to talk to you about identity and relationships and the profound impact that leaving a religion can have there. And I've got a little presentation that I would like to share with you. Okay, so tonight we'll be talking about identity and relationships. And to me, this is a really important connection here between what kind of social relationships we have and how that defines our roles and our identities. I think that this is something that's quite universal when one person leaves a religion, is figuring out how do they navigate that and how do they cope with the loss of those identities and those connections? How do they build new ones? So leaving a religion often comes at a really great social cost. It often requires sacrificing the powerful institutional support of a religious institution. And it can mean losing your former community, especially if that was your main social community. It can mean losing close friendships and family ties, or it can mean that those ties look very different. And especially insular religious communities, admitting openly that you no longer believe in the faith can really change your social landscape. In the Mormon faith, for example, if you were to come out and say, I don't believe in any of this, then you would no longer be invited to some really important events, including weddings. And in some cases, this isn't people just deciding, oh, I don't want to see you there if you don't believe in this. In some cases, that's dictated by the church, and people feel that they don't have a choice to include those family members that they would like to have there. In religions such as the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Exclusive Brethren, you might be disowned by or estranged from your family. In leaving, many people also struggle with the new responsibility of building social connections after losing so many. Religious communities are pretty unique in that they provide this built-in social network and these sort of structured socialization and bonding rituals through prayer, religious study, and other religious activities. In comparison, the secular world can feel very daunting to people. It can feel like there's an enormous variety of choices. And while this is very freeing, that uncertainty can also be really scary. As you navigate all of these different choices for social connection, people often come to realize that this comes with an enormous amount of personal responsibility to maintain these relationships. The safety net that religious institutions provide can also be challenging to rebuild. Being a member of a religious community can provide a financial safety net and several job opportunities that may not be available to those outside of the religion. This can make leaving especially difficult for people who feel that they might just be barely scraping by, and especially for those people whose jobs or entire careers are inherently tied up into their religious community and identity. We define ourselves in large part by the social roles that we take on and in how we see ourselves relative to others. With the loss of social connections comes the loss of these established roles and personal identities. Religion often provides clear-cut roles depending on your age, your gender, your marital status, or even your role in the religious institution. For example, if you're a pastor, or maybe everybody knows you as, the pastor's wife, or the person who organizes all of the church luncheons. In Haredi Judaism, for example, there are also these really strict hierarchies among communities. Marriages are typically arranged by parents to ensure that there's an appropriate match of status between their children. Young men and women are educated separately, and they have very structured and distinct paths, sometimes with little room for diverging from the norm. Their identities have already been chosen for them. Even social roles that are not inherently religious can take on new meanings in the context of religion. For example, a family might seem like a very straightforward area of roles. You're the son, you're a father, you're a mother, but these things can mean very different things depending on which religion you're talking about. In a 2007 study by Davidman and Greel, a young Haredi woman describes being taught that as a child, all of her sins would transfer onto her father until she turned 12. And in the Mormon faith, for example, many believe that they can only reach the highest form of the afterlife, the celestial kingdom, if all of their family is complete, meaning that they all subscribe to that Mormon faith. The often sacred nature of families in a religious context confers a sense of importance to family roles that can feel lost when one leaves a religion. These roles, however, also come with significant responsibilities, and it can feel really challenging to feel that you're abandoning these responsibilities to pursue who you truly are. These lost identities can feel particularly painful because in many cases, the process of going through this doubting process and realizing that you don't actually believe what the church members and these members of your religious community have been telling you is true is not really a choice for some people. In a 2019 study by Lee and Gruby, participants who had left an evangelical Christian faith described the process of disbelieving as kind of an unwanted realization rather than a volitional decision. The participants described coming to a point where they realized that not only the ideas that were being taught to them, but also the roles and identities that they had assumed in the context of their religion no longer felt authentic to them. They felt that they had no choice but to discard them in order to live a life that felt true to who they were. As we touched on a bit in the previous slide, the loss of these religious identities has cascading consequences for family members and for others. In Lee and Gruby's 2019 study, one participant described how the loss of his formal role of husband and as a pastor in the church resulted also in the loss of his wife's formal role as a wife within the church. He explained, it basically meant the end of my marriage, because for my wife at the time, your whole status as a woman in the church is based upon who you're married to. So for her, having someone who is basically being ostracized by the church meant she had zero status in the church. It's almost worse than having a husband who's not a part of it. You have a husband who's an apostate. And many of you may come from religious Christian backgrounds where they talk about apostates and apostasy. You may be familiar with the stigma attached to that term. In many Christian faiths, apostasy, or learning about the religion and then deciding you don't want to be a part of it, is considered the gravest sin. So this can be quite serious. These role losses can feel very threatening to family members. A woman who has left the Mormon faith, for example, is believed to be shutting out her family from the celestial kingdom forever. That can be a really massive burden to bear. Many people who realize that they no longer believe in a faith are confronted with a choice: either hide their disbelief or risk damaging their relationships by being honest. Neither of these choices feels very appealing at the time. In Lee and Gruby's 2019 study, participants who chose to hide their disbelief described feeling like frauds or like they were undercover. They felt a distance between themselves and their families. Even though they were doing this to ostensibly keep their families together, it felt like those relationships weren't really real and that their families didn't really know who they were. This can be doubly difficult for someone who might be LGBTQ and might feel like they're in two closets: one, hiding that they don't believe in this faith, and two, hiding who they are as a person with their sexuality or their gender identity. One participant in that study, a former Jehovah's Witness, described having to express his disbelief very carefully so that he could minimize the consequences for his family. I'd like to read a quote from him for you. He says, "When I finally said I was leaving, I tried to express myself in such a way that I was not attacking the church, because if I had done anything like that, then it would be like a formal shunning. And so I had to make a point of saying as much as I could without saying the wrong thing and getting myself disfellowshipped. If I had been disfellowshipped and it was found out that my mom still talks to me, she could risk being removed too." So there's this huge burden here of, do I live in what feels authentic to myself, or do I choose to be honest with my family and navigate what happens after that? And in some cases, that honesty might not be so black and white. It might look like, how can I be honest and be myself and convey what I believe in a way that minimizes these consequences? And that can be incredibly difficult to navigate. Constructing new identities after leaving a faith can be a slow and long process. For many, the beginning stages of this process can feel like living between two worlds at once: the world of their religion or their former religion and the secular world. A Haredi Jewish woman in David Min and Grill's study described sneaking out of her family's house to go to a bar. She talked about how she would wear pants under her skirt, and then when she got to the bar, she'd take her skirt off, so she was just wearing pants. And then, of course, when she came home, she would put the skirt back on again and act like nothing had changed. Another participant in the study described hiding his traditional curls behind his ears whenever he went dancing at clubs. And then, of course, when he went back to the village, he would put his curls back down. especially in insular religions, such as Haredi Jewish sects, Jehovah's Witnesses, the Amish, and some branches of Islam. It can be really challenging to transition to living in the secular world. Many members and former members of these religions grow up in kind of an isolated and self-sufficient world that tends to be secluded from the outside secular world. These communities can also be geographically and culturally isolated, sometimes with only very limited exposure to the primary language spoken in the country that they live in. Many don't have an opportunity to even get a glimpse at the outside world through TV or movies, because sometimes these are not allowed or not even accessible. Another major hurdle to constructing new identities is the lack of institutional support. The process of joining a religion is typically highly structured. The religious institution typically provides guidance, social support, rituals to signify new identities, and cultural scripts for the conversion process. Leaving a religion, on the other hand, is often done in isolation and without the guidance of these cultural scripts. The participants in Davidman and Grill's study describe themselves as actors without a script, who have had to build and improvise these new identities all on their own. Coming from a religion that assigns roles and identities, it can feel like a really steep learning curve to navigate how to take on this full responsibility for creating your new identity. Ex-evangelical Christian participants in Lee and Groovy's study describe being taught in the faith that only God was responsible for their achievements and that they needed to put their future in God's hands to decide. These messages can be disempowering, and they can foster a lack of autonomy. This can create some pretty severe challenges when it comes to knowing how to think for yourself and how to take responsibility for your life and take it in a direction that feels right to you. Many who are suddenly tasked with determining their own future feel pretty ill-equipped to do so. In the search for a new identity, people sometimes become stuck in reactive identities. In his 2017 study, Fisher explains that the process of leaving a religion can be really stressful, and it can provoke that defensive fight or flight response. This can cause a person to develop an identity that is deeply focused on rejecting a religion. Initially, this can feel very empowering because it feels like you're asserting your beliefs and you finally have the space to say what you really think. But there is also a downside. It can leave people feeling stuck to the faith that they left and disempowered to build a new identity that doesn't center religion. While many who leave a religion mourn the loss of certainty that begins during the disbelieving process, they also describe those experiences as being the catalyst of an empowering journey to determine their own identities and futures. In NISA's 2020 study, participants explained that adopting a new identity label to explain their beliefs, such as atheist, agnostic, humanist, or skeptic, felt like a critical step in developing their new self-concept and identity. Participants also expressed that it was empowering to translate to the secular world the values and skill sets that had drawn them to certain roles within their religious communities. One participant, Maya, expressed that she was able to translate her role that she had had in the church as sort of a building social coordinator to pursuing an occupation in interior design. Even participating in the same activities that people once participated while they were in their faith, such as volunteering, took on a new significance for participants after they had left the church. A former Baptist priest, Schuyler, described that he had always volunteered and done charity work, but that he found a new sense of fulfillment when he participated in these activities after leaving the church, because it felt like they came from his own volition and that he wasn't just doing them to earn brownie points with the church. You may notice if you attended my last presentation that this is the same slide from there, and that's because I think these are all such important points in healing from religious trauma, no matter what aspect we're talking about. But I'd like to start by sharing some things that I think might be unique to this social and identity element. So according to the research, one of the biggest challenges to healing from this social and identity component of religious trauma is the feeling of being alone that often comes with that process of leaving. And while the process of leaving is a really personal journey that is unique to each person, it can make a huge difference if you can feel supported in that journey. Support groups play a really important role in offering a community for people who have left or are leaving a religion. One thing that the research shows is that it makes a huge difference to have people you can talk to who have actually been there. The research often groups non-believers into nuns and duns. And the nuns are those who have never believed in a religion, whereas the duns are those who were once religious. And while secular meetups and resources in general can be really helpful to validate, these feelings and experiences that somebody goes through in this journey, research has shown that people leaving religion feel uniquely understood and supported when they're able to connect with other religious duns. That's one thing I think that makes groups like this one so important. Even if you've already completed your journey in disaffiliating from your prior faith, sharing your story with others can help to make sense of those experiences and to continue building that personal narrative that feels authentic to you. It can also help others who are going through their own journeys make sense of what's going on for them and to know that it can be done and that there's hope there. If you're struggling to navigate the challenges of reconstructing your identity and building those new social connections after leaving a faith, you may also find that it might be helpful to devote some time exploring this with the support of the counselor. On this slide, I've listed the studies that I referenced during this presentation. I was actually really pleased to find during my research that there's been a lot of research on this area of leaving a religion, but there's also been a real shift in focus in the past few years. So instead of focusing on all of this numerical data, trying to find out and explain, often in pretty stigmatizing ways, why somebody might leave a religion, recent research has kind of pivoted to highlighting participants' lived experiences in a respectful way and in their own words. And that's all for me. So thanks everybody so much for having me here tonight. And I really look forward to hearing some of your thoughts and experiences.